Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Craig Burrell, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Commander Phil Andrews. We warmly welcome the family of Private John Henry Hammon, whose story will be told shortly. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by family and visitors to the memorial. If you are able, please stand and join in singing the National Anthem.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are one and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is girt by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts, all beauty rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains that let us sing, advance Australia fair.
Please sit if you can do so. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the hearts of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Private John Henry Hammon. John Hammon was born in about 1883 in Ballarat, Victoria, the eldest son of Henry and Emily Hammon. Known as Jack to his family and friends, he attended school in Ballarat and nearby Creswick. As a young man, he moved to Sydney where he worked as a grocer. In July 1915, Hammon enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force. He trained at Liverpool Army Camp outside Sydney for several months before embarking on the troopship Port Lincoln in October. Early in 1916, he joined his unit, the 4th Australian Infantry Battalion, which was training in Egypt. In March, the Australian infantry left the Middle East and sailed to France to join the fighting on the Western Front. Hammon's unit travelled to the north of France to continue training in the conditions of combat that they would encounter in Europe. The 4th Battalion entered battle for the first time at the village of Pozières, north of the Somme River. The Australians faced determined German resistance, and during the fighting in late July, Hammon was severely wounded in the legs and backed by shrapnel from an artillery shell. He was evacuated to a hospital in France and then taken to England, where he underwent an operation to remove shrapnel pieces from his leg. Hammon spent the winter of 1916 and 1917 recovering at the army camp in Salisbury Plain, where he wrote to his friend in Australia saying that although the people in England were very nice, he missed the warm weather of Australia. Hammon returned to France in March 1917. He felt that he was not quite fighting fit, but men were needed at the front, and he continued training and recuperating in the rear areas. When he rejoined the 4th Battalion in June, it was recovering from a heavy fighting near Bullecourt in the previous months. Towards the end of 1917, the unit prepared to take part in the major British assault around the Belgian city of Ypres. Hammon took part in several battles, directing at capturing the high ground of Flanders. Around the tiny village of Passchendaele, the assaulting forces foundered in the mud. Through the efforts of the Canadian, New Zealand, British and Australian forces, the ridgeline was eventually captured at the cost of enormous casualties. Hammon and the rest of the Australians then entered a period of training and recovery in a quieter sector of the front. They spent the winter of 1917 and 1918 near the border of France and Belgium. In March 1918, Hammon had 2 weeks leave in England, and when he returned, the Germans had launched a major offensive. Known as the German Spring Offensive, it was to be the last large-scale assault of the war. By the middle of the year, the German troops had lost their momentum and the attack had been stopped. At this point, the British and French forces and their allies began a series of attacks that would ultimately end the war in November. The 4th Battalion took part in the massed assault by the British, Australian and Canadian troops at Amiens on the 8th of August 1918, capturing more ground than any other single day of the war. In the following weeks, the 4th Battalion participated in further attacks but sought to consolidate the gains and push the German forces further back. One of these battles took place near the French village of Chugny on the 23rd of August 1918. During the fighting, Hammon was killed in action. He was 35 years old. Jack Hammon is buried in Heath Cemetery in France, where more than 1,800 Commonwealth soldiers are buried or commemorated. His mother chose the simple epitaph, "Price of Peace." 2 of Jack's younger brothers also served in the Australian Imperial Force. Private Norman Hammon was a member of the 2nd Machine Gun Battalion, and Corporal Harry Hammon was in the Army Medical Corps. Both saw action in the Western Front and both returned to Australia in 1919. In Australia, Jack Hammon was survived by his mother, his younger sister Jessie and younger brother Cecil. Private John Henry Hammon is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the Pool of Reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private John Henry Hammon, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We'll remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many men lying out there at Pozieres or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you all a very good evening.